water throughout the depth of this aquifer, because it goes from 40 to over 130 feet deep. So I just wanted you to know that this time frame of a couple decades seems long, but it's very typical because of the amount of work and investigation that's needed to find out how large your contaminated groundwater is, what the concentrations are, where the higher concentrations are, and therefore what's the most appropriate method to treat the groundwater to reduce the risk at the facility. I thought it was important for you to understand this is a very typical time frame to conduct this amount of work and understand exactly what problem you have so you can properly address it with the remediation, cleanup, and the source area control, which is also very important. You saw some of the figures as we were coming in to show you basically a cross section, in other words, a looking straight at it view of the contaminated groundwater. This would be an area down by the dam to the south. If you were to actually be underground looking at the contamination, this is the view, the profile of it from top to bottom. And you can see that the red area shows the area where the contaminated groundwater is below the surface of the water table, where the groundwater table starts, which is about 720 feet. But you go down another 30 or 40 feet before we actually detect the TCE in the groundwater. And that was a question someone had about the potential for vapors to migrate up out of the groundwater and potentially into some of the homes in the residential area. But we've demonstrated that the TCE is not migrating upward in the groundwater because it's simply not present in that upper 30 or 40 feet of groundwater immediately below the homes. This gives you some idea of what this groundwater looks like as it approaches the Thornapple River and actually meets the Thornapple River, which is much higher in elevation, but as the groundwater approaches the river, it tends to move upward from that 120, 130 foot depth and move upward and actually enter the Thornapple River. And then the other cross section shows you sort of a cross view of what we're looking at. If you're looking north towards the plant from the south, the plant being on the right-hand side, source control was conducted under the building, and you can see the contamination moves downward towards the river and gives you a good view of the horizontal well, the interceptor trench, which is nothing more than a horizontal pipe in the ground with holes in it that's placed in the bottom of the trench, which is the box area. They simply excavate some of the soil and put more permeable material, gravel-type material that allows the contamination to more easily flow downward into that pipe and then be captured and pumped back into the building for treatment. And you can see the elevation of the river there looking north at the west end of the plant. Again, our goal tonight was to, in this presentation, discuss with you the history of the TCE, how it came to be discovered, what the current conditions were at the facility. We also want to discuss with you the steps that we're going to be taking moving forward to ensure that Bradford White properly manages risk by treating the source area, greatly reducing the concentrations below the building, and then greatly reducing any contamination that could be migrating towards the river in the future. What is migrating is also being intercepted as it moves towards the river, and we're also calculating the mixing zone-based or generic GSI criteria that are protective of all uses of the Thornapple River and continuing to test the water as it approaches the Thornapple River to ensure that it meets those criteria, or if it does not, engage again with Bradford White to hold them accountable to come up with a potential solution to reduce those concentrations should that be necessary. And so, and again, we also want to make sure there's plenty of time to give you a chance to answer some questions or to clarify anything during our presentation. So now, anything else, representatives? Dave, would you like to wrap up and discuss, folks, how we're going to take on the question and answer period?
Sure, happy to do that. I think we'll make it, fairly simple. We'll just ask folks to come up and answer their questions. So we have a panel of folks here, and we've got some other folks in the audience who can get to help us out. If you'd prefer not to ask us a question, but would like to have it answered, we do have some cards that Les back there is going to have, and we'll be able to hand that out or pick them up if you've already got the question on it. And we'll answer those questions as they come. I know that some people are, got some real serious concerns about this, and I want to make sure that we get to all of those. So if you're going to come up and make a statement, I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do that. And if we've got more time in the end, you can come up and say some more. So that's how we're going to do that. That's right. Dave, you're going to have a copy of this presentation available?
Yes.
How do we do that?
So my contact information my contact information is on this last slide. Many of you have already emailed comments and concerns to me or sent letters. You can contact me again at my email address was vickyd@michigan.gov. We'll leave it up for a while, or you can give me a call at my cell phone number 517-420-2605, and I'd be happy to email you or provide you with a copy of the presentation slides. I know we didn't mention, but we've had it on display in the Middleville Library for a few weeks now. Again, many of these monitoring reports, and the calculations and information regarding the calculations of mixing zone-based criteria. So that information is still available at the library as well for you.
So if anybody has a question they'd like to ask, please approach one of the microphones. We'd like to field those questions. You got a couple there? Sir, you want to go ahead? Give it a whirl.
First of all, thanks for coming. Herb Gandy, Thornapple Watershed Council. Sounds like your criteria is based on the river's designated use. What is the designated use in the middle?
It's all the designated uses, so the Rule 100 and the Part 4 standards list, I think there's 7 or 8 designated uses. So they're agriculture, warm water fishery, cold water fishery, other indigenous aquatic life and wildlife. And so the human health, some of the human health impacts fall within those designated uses. So yeah, at a minimum, the Thornapple has to meet all those designated uses. There isn't one or two. There isn't just 1 or 2 designated uses. It has to meet all those.
Thank you.
I just wanted to I have a couple questions here. If I can ask one, and I'll let you go. Is that fair? This one is, if there is no mixing zone, and I'm going to add words to this, if there's no mixing zone-based criteria, now, will the contaminated water be discharged? And the truth is that this groundwater has been discharging with the TCE for many years now. The granting of the calculation of a mixing zone-based criteria is a tool that's allowed by the statute that gives us the opportunity that gives Bradford White the opportunity to demonstrate that the discharge that has been going on for many, many years is not deleterious to the water body. Sir?
Hi, my name's Mike Evans. I apologize for coming in late. You may have addressed this earlier in your presentation, but I was curious what the baseline level of TCE is that you're shooting for. I know what we've gotten down to, and then a related question is you mentioned how many pounds of VOCs have been removed up to this point. How many pounds of VOCs do you calculate are still in the ground that remain to be removed?
It's a great question, Dave. We probably don't have the answers to some of those, but those are good questions.
Regarding baseline concentrations, obviously no one wants to see any contamination migrating into the river We are seeing steady, if not decreasing, trends of concentrations when we test the monitor wells that are nearest to the river. And again, under the building, we have a concentration, as a matter of fact, we're as high as 440,000 micrograms per liter under the building. Again, 15 years later, we're down to about 5,000 micrograms per liter. So greatly reduce the concentration under the building that could be migrating towards the river, and we'll continue, to monitor those concentrations. Every 6 months, the company collects samples from those several monitor wells that are in the area where the contamination is migrating towards the river. And so we want to continue to see those concentrations reduce over time. And so it's really no baseline, but again, there's very little contamination remaining on the building to migrate towards the river, continuing to intercept it and treat it.
What amount of TCE is allowed in drinking water?
The maximum contaminant level in drinking water is I believe, 5 micrograms per liter.
Okay, and it was 533 right now?
The maximum concentration?
What's existing in the ground? It been reduced to what, 533 or something? If I remember right, on that slide.
Yeah. We can double check, but I think you're correct. It's in that range. Tell me what it's called. Yeah, the current concentrations in the monitor wells are, it's 300 to 400 parts per billion in the monitor wells, near the river. Thank you. Does that help?
Before I get to this gentleman and then you. When were the homeowners informed of this contaminated groundwater? Is the question. So the homeowners who were affected should have received a notice from Bradford White. A lot of these came out in 2002 when we passed some rules for providing notice to people affected of groundwater. So those notices were supposed to have been mailed out to, in this case, all of the affected parties, everybody who lives over the groundwater contamination. And I can't tell you right now if those notices were mailed out or not, because I haven't looked at that file in a while.
They did issue notices of migration and contamination to the residents who were, again, in the areas in the areas where the contaminated groundwater was migrating. That was done by Bradford White. And also, again, over time, the DEQ and Bradford White have had discussions, again, with the village, with some of the stakeholders. Matter of fact, with the Watershed Council, there was an EPA consent order back in the 80s, and the Watershed Council and some other stakeholders were involved in those negotiations. So, the DEQ and the company have had some discussions with both the village and some of the stakeholders over the years regarding the contamination. And again, they're required when contamination is migrating off their property to notify affected homeowners.
Sir?
I was wondering if, what's Bradford White's specific? I mean, have they released a statement on there? Because we're here for the DEQ, but what's Bradford White? What's their take on their own responsibility in terms of cleaning up the mess they made, for lack of a better term? I mean, I get that there's certain levels that they're trying to meet and maintain. I guess what I'm getting at is, could they do more? Like they did that, like the soybean oil up by the factory. Could they be doing that down in this Plume, down to the south here?
The short answer is could they? Yes, they could. Again, we want to continue monitoring the levels that are in these monitor wells at the river. And again, we have these criteria that have been calculated to ensure that we're being protective of all the uses. Should, for instance, concentrations in the groundwater exceed those criteria that are protective of the river, certainly that would be an option that the company could consider. They could propose to us to reduce the concentrations below those criteria so that we can continue to be protective of those uses of the river. So short answer is they could if it was necessary to manage the risk. Does that help?
Yeah, yes, it does. I was just wondering if they had, I don't know, I guess, be a little bit more proactive about it.
Well, they were very proactive in that source area, and again, they reduced concentrations, many orders of magnitude in the source area. And they certainly could, again, if it was necessary to manage risk for the uses of that river, that would be one method that they could propose to us. Again, remember, we're holding them accountable to comply with the law, and there are many tools that they can use to demonstrate their compliance. If they were to be out of compliance with those numbers, they could utilize that tool or others to reduce the concentration below those criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Tim Woodburn, and I'm work in the field, but I don't mean to really ask a question to really put you on the spot, but I'm just curious to know what you would think. How much longer do you anticipate, or can you predict for that the groundwater extraction and treatment system would need to go on to get to closure?